This is
Right.
All right, well, it's good to see everyone here who's turned up one way or another. Welcome. And we have someone who, as they say, usual cliche needs no introduction. Nick Needham was and still is, for 25 years, more or less, a lecturer in church history at this establishment, HTC. So one of the, we'll say the founding fathers, one of the foundation stones, perhaps, of this institution. So it's great to have Nick back to speak to us. And for the reason that he wants to try out something on us, which he tells us is the part of the 6th volume of his 2000 Years of Christ's Power. As you know, it's got to volume 5 so far. That's the 18th century, but now we're on to the 19th century, I suppose. That would make sense, wouldn't it? That would be logical. And speaking of logical, none other than what's his name? Jörg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel?
Yes.
Who you probably are familiar with the name, but we're going to learn much more about who he is, what he thought, and why it matters. So Nick, over to you. Thanks for making it in today. We look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, well, what I'm going to do is, first of all, give a biographical introduction to Hegel, to give him a human face, so that we know who we're looking at. I always think that's useful with church history. And then I'm going to go on to look at his thought, but particularly, of course, I'm going to be concentrating on his theology, the impact of his thought on theology. He impacted all kinds of areas of thought, but I'm going to be focusing on his theological impact. And one other caveat, this is going to be largely descriptive, so I'm not going to be giving any great sort of challenges to Hegel here, or I'm not going to tell you where he was right or where he was wrong. This is largely descriptive. If you want to ask afterwards about sort of evaluating him, then that's fine, but I'm not going to be doing that in the actual talk. So first of all, let's look at Hegel the man. We'll begin with this. Next after Schleiermacher, the most influential German theologian of the 19th century was Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Now, he is often classified as a philosopher, and that classification is correct. He was, however, the most intensely religious of philosophers, who advocated for Christianity as the absolute religion, quote unquote, and he deeply impacted theology in his own day and beyond. Unusually for philosophers, he is never known by his forenames, but only as Hegel, or at most by the abbreviations of his forenames, G.W.F. Hegel. But no one except amateur dabblers in philosophy refers to him as George Hegel. Perhaps in some strange way, this testifies to his uniqueness. Students may find him uniquely incomprehensible. He has the reputation of being the most difficult of all philosophers to understand. But that should not blind us to his intellectual greatness and his profound historical influence. So Hegel's life. Hegel was born in 1770 in the city of Stuttgart, capital of what was then the German Duchy of Württemberg. His parents raised him as a Lutheran. The oldest of 3 children, he had a specially close relationship with his sister Christiane, who was devoted to him. His father, Georg Ludwig, a tax officer, had clerical aspirations for his son, resulting in Hegel's studying for the Lutheran ministry at a seminary attached to Tübingen University in 1788. The seminary preserved a form of medieval monastic discipline. Students had to wear a distinctive garb, and all breaches of discipline were subject to an elaborate system of penalties, such as withholding the wine allowance at meals, which Hegel must have suffered many times. He was notorious for skipping lectures. At Tübingen Seminary, Hegel was improbably plunged into the budding world of German Romanticism through his friendships with his roommates, the poet Friedrich Hölderlin and the philosopher Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph von Schelling. Schelling and Hegel would develop the philosophical movement known as idealism, of which the mature Hegel would become the most famous exponent. More on this later. Hölderlin inspired the young Hegel with a passion for the ancient Greeks, especially their philosophical thought, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and the other Greek luminaries of the pre-Christian era. This attraction to Greek thought would enter into Hegel's mature philosophizing. But Hegel wasn't only a devotee of ancient philosophy, he also devoured the modern philosophical works of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the leading Enlightenment thinker whose writings helped pave the way for the French Revolution in 1789. When the revolution began, Hegel was an enthusiastic supporter. He always believed there was much that was positive in the principles of the French Revolution, although he came to disapprove of the violent and destructive way it was carried out. For the rest of his life, he celebrated Bastille Day, July the 14th, when France's royal Bastille jail fell to a French revolutionary mob. After his theology studies at Tübingen, Hegel chose not to enter the ordained Lutheran ministry, instead taking up a post as a private tutor in the Swiss canton of Bern in 1793. The following year saw him immersed in the philosophical writings of Immanuel Kant, the Enlightenment's supreme philosopher, and of Johann Fichte, not so well remembered today, but a philosophical titan at that time. Hegel by now had begun to put his own thoughts into writing, including a life of Jesus and the positivity of the Christian religion. Now, these early writings do not indicate his mature thinking, since they're quite critical of Orthodox religion. But it's interesting that Christianity, one way or another, obviously loomed large in the young Hegel's mind. In 1796, Hegel may have written a fragmentary treatise entitled The First Program for a System of German Idealism. Its authorship is disputed, but Hegel, Schelling, and Hölderlin have all been suggested singly or jointly. Whoever wrote it, the treatise indicates that German idealism was now beginning its odyssey in the minds of Germany's thinkers. Its driving force was a quest for unity, that is, an understanding of reality in which all dualities and oppositions would be resolved into some kind of all-encompassing oneness. But a discussion of the full meaning of this philosophical movement is going to be postponed until we come to consider Hegel's mature thought. In 1797, Hegel moved to Frankfurt, an imperial free city, that is, not under the jurisdiction of a German state, as tutor to a wine merchant's family. It was in Frankfurt that Hegel began to reassess his attitude to Christianity. This took place under the influence of his friend, Hölderlin, who was moving towards an outlook in which Christianity fulfilled, rather than negated, the gods of the ancient Greek culture, which Hölderlin and Hegel so much admired. Hegel, too, now abandoned his earlier hostility to Orthodox religion, partly through studying the Christian mystics of the Middle Ages. This culminated at last in Hegel's embrace of the church of his childhood, becoming a practicing Lutheran. When people think of Hegel as a philosopher, they often forget his religious life as a committed Lutheran who consistently championed Lutheranism as the best and highest form of Christianity. In 1801, prompted by Schelling, Hegel moved to the University of Jena in the Duchy of Saxe-Weimar, where he taught as a Privatdozent, an unsalaried lecturer. He survived on an inheritance from his father, who had died in 1799. Now, two chief events marked Hegel's time at Jena. First, he succumbed to the physical charms of his landlady, Christiana Burckhardt, and in 1807 had an illegitimate son with her, whom they named Ludwig. Hegel financially provided for Christiana and Ludwig. A few years after Hegel's marriage to a Nuremberg senator's daughter, in 1811, he took Ludwig into his home. Ludwig was then 10 and had been living in an orphanage after Christiana's death. The second great event was the completion, in 1806, of Hegel's long-promised philosophical treatise, Phenomenology of Mind. It was published the following year. It would be safe to say that Phenomenology of Mind is one of the most challenging masterworks of philosophy ever written, owing to Hegel's obscure style of writing, an obscurity that pervaded all his treatises. Hegel's final words on his deathbed were said to have been, "There was only one man who ever understood me, and even he didn't understand me." Nevertheless, phenomenology had a mysterious, captivating power, and it's still seriously studied to this day. Analysis of its content will be deferred until we come to consider Hegel's philosophical thought as a whole. But we can say that with the publication of the Phenomenology, German idealism in all its majesty had well and truly arrived on the philosophical scene. It's striking to note that just as Hegel was putting the final touches to his magnum opus, the French Revolutionary Army of Napoleon Bonaparte shattered the Prussian army on Hegel's very doorstep, so to speak, at the Battle of Jena on the 14th of October, 1806. This brought the city and the whole of Prussia, Germany's largest, most powerful state, under Napoleon's control. Hegel actually saw the victorious French emperor and famously commented, "I saw the emperor, this world soul, riding outside the city, surveying the land. It is truly a wonderful feeling to see such a man who, confined to one place, mounted on a horse, reaches out and subdues the entire world. This outstanding man whom one cannot but admire." Now, however much Hegel admired Napoleon, the French emperor's victory at the Battle of Jena and the French military occupation of the city compelled Hegel to flee to Bamberg in Bavaria. He'd mailed portions of the manuscript of Phenomenology of Mind for publication, and for a time he was in a state of dread over whether it all got through in the confusion produced by the French invasion of Germany. Thankfully for Hegel, the manuscripts all reached the publisher, and the masterpiece of German idealism rolled off the printing press in April 1807. Now, the Phenomenology did not secure Hegel's academic career, and he languished in various jobs that did not match his intellectual talents, editing a newspaper, running a secondary school at Nuremberg, until he finally achieved his long-cherished ambition and was appointed a professor at the University of Heidelberg in 1816, where he lectured on logic and metaphysics. It was at Heidelberg that he published his Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, in which he sought to give an overview of his entire philosophy. By now, his fame and influence were growing, resulting in his being offered a professorship at the University of Berlin, the Prussian capital. He moved to Berlin in 1818, lecturing there on philosophy for the rest of his life. It was during his time in Berlin that Hegel attracted a large body of students and founded a philosophical movement that identified itself as Hegelian. Among his lecture series at Berlin, later published, were his lectures on the philosophy of history, the history of philosophy, the philosophy of religion, and the philosophy of right or law. It's always been a topic of fascination for church history students that Hegel and Schleiermacher, the twin titans of 19th century German theology, taught at Berlin University at the same time. However, their interaction was minimal, since neither man had any appreciation for the other's approach to religion. Hegel rejected Schleiermacher's conception of religion as a sense of absolute dependence, claiming that it made religion subhuman, since even dogs have a sense of absolute dependence on their masters. Schleiermacher, for his part, rejected Hegel's system of philosophy, including his philosophy of religion, as mere intellectualism, devoid of any personal experience or heart. Perhaps neither man was wholly just to the other. After both had passed from the earthly scene, a generation arose that appreciated both men and endeavored to synthesize their outlooks. Hegel died unexpectedly in November 1831, probably of some sort of gastrointestinal disease. His literary and lecturing labors had changed the course of German philosophy and German religion. To see how and why, let's now turn our attention to Hegel's thought. So this is part 2, Hegel's thought. So as we've seen, Hegel was an idealist in his philosophical outlook. Now, idealism is the name given to a development in German philosophy flowing from the thought of Immanuel Kant, the fountainhead of German idealism. It's easy to be misled by the word. It's not a reference to being idealistic in the sense of pursuing high moral or political ideals. In the history of philosophy, the word idealism refers to ideas. You could express it by saying ideaism, just leave out the L, ideaism. According to Hegel, and other idealist philosophers, ideas constitute the nature of ultimate reality. Or, to state it more fully and accurately, since ideas have no existence except in the minds that think them, reality is ultimately mental in nature. Mind is the root and essence of reality. This is what Hegel was getting at in one of his most famous utterances: the real is the rational, and the rational is the real. When we've stripped away all errors and illusions, we find that the true nature of reality is rational consciousness. Now, this may seem contrary to common sense. How can mind constitute all of reality? Did Hegel not believe in the reality of the material world? Well, Hegel's argument was that everything in the material world, tables and trees, frogs and flowers, seas and stars, are all objects of consciousness. No one ever knows anything except as an object of his or her consciousness. Everything known to humanity is thus an object of human consciousness, an item within the mind's field of perception and understanding. Consciousness, then, is the primary reality, in and through which everything is known. On this basis, Hegel reasoned, we must set out to study consciousness if we would grasp the true nature of reality. When we study consciousness in the right way, we come to see that consciousness and reality are identical. Now, Hegel's outlook that mind and reality are ultimately the same thing was not intended as a recipe for a billion different realities conjured up by a billion different minds. Such a view has been held in philosophy and is known as subjective idealism. Hegel, however, rejected subjective idealism. If billions of individual minds exist, each thinking and creating its own individual reality, then, Hegel argued, no individual mind would be capable of knowing very much of reality. By far the greater part of reality would in that case be made up of the creations of other people's minds inaccessible to my mind. How would I know what the realities of a billion other minds were? My only hope of accessing reality lies in holding that my mind and all other individual minds are simply manifestations of one supreme and ultimate mind, whose thoughts constitute the essence of cosmic reality. Hegel then was an idealist. He believed in mind, or rational consciousness, as the supreme and sovereign reality, but his idealism was not of the subjective kind. He called his view absolute idealism. Rather than a billion different mental worlds created by a billion individual disconnected minds, Hegel envisioned a single cosmic reality created by a single absolute or cosmic mind. Our individual minds, for Hegel, only have reality by their participation in the cosmic mind. It thinks its thoughts in and through us. Each individual mind is thus a sort of miniature manifestation of the true reality, the cosmic mind. But the cosmic mind transcends the individual mind, just as rationality transcends the individual reasoner. Now, the cosmic mind, according to Hegel, is perfectly one with its creation, that is, with all of reality, which is a sort of vast, complex idea within the cosmic mind. Hegel's God and the cosmos are thus truly and absolutely one reality, since the cosmos is, by definition, the cosmic mind's way of thinking and knowing itself. The unfolding history of the cosmos is the cosmic mind's process of achieving self-understanding and self-realization. The cosmos, therefore, has no reality of its own except as the cosmic mind's developing idea of itself. Now, this raises very sharply the question of Hegel's relationship to traditional Christian beliefs about God. Hegel claimed the name of Christian and lived within the bosom of the Lutheran Church in Prussia. He never lost an opportunity to extol Lutheranism as the best and truest version of the Christian faith. Yet in traditional Christian thinking, contrary to Hegel's philosophy, God does not need the universe to achieve self-understanding or self-realization. He is already perfect in himself, eternally self-realized and self-comprehending. Nor is God identical with the universe in traditional theism. Rather, there is an infinite qualitative distinction between God and creation. Hegel, however, eliminated that distinction. The cosmic mind and the cosmos it thinks in order to achieve self-realization are in the deepest sense one undivided reality for Hegel. He especially applied this concept of absolute cosmic unity to the human mind or spirit. Hegel had a strong aversion to any idea of separation between humanity and God, where God was postulated as existing somewhere out there in a transcendence that split him off from the human world down here. Hegel critiqued traditional theism along these very lines. It fostered a false separation or schism between the human and the divine. As Hegel affirmed in his introduction to the philosophy of religion, quote, "It is impossible that there should be two different kinds of reason and two different kinds of spirit. It is not possible that there can be a separate divine reason and human reason. It is impossible for there to be a divine spirit and a human spirit, which are wholly different. Human reason, our consciousness of our own being, is truly reason. It is the divine within man. And spirit, to the degree that it is God's spirit, and not a spirit beyond the stars, beyond the cosmos. Quite the opposite. God is present, he is everywhere present, and he exists as spirit in all spirits." Now, this aspect of Hegel's philosophy has prompted some interpreters to classify Hegel as a pantheist. In pantheism, God and the cosmos are just different names for each other. All is God and God is all. And it is possible to interpret much of Hegel's thought in this way. There's only one problem. Hegel himself plainly rejected pantheism in his lectures on the philosophy of religion. The great modern philosopher of pantheism was the Jewish genius Baruch Spinoza, for whom Hegel had huge intellectual admiration. But his admiration was not unqualified. Hegel also delivered a negative verdict on Spinoza for, in effect, denying the genuine reality of the cosmos and ending up with God as the only true existing reality in his philosophy. So in his own mind, Hegel was neither a traditional theist nor a pantheist. So what was he? Well, some noted interpreters have suggested that panentheism is the best description of Hegel's religious position. This is the view that the cosmos is part of God or an aspect of God, but that it does not define the whole of God's reality. God is the cosmos, but he is also more than the cosmos. An analogy might be that when a person looks at a star in the night sky, he is seeing the star. Yet what he sees is only a pinprick of light. The star is much more than that tiny pinprick. It's a vast flaming ball of hydrogen and helium. So we could say that while the pinprick of light seen by the observer is the star, the pinprick does not exhaust the star's being. Likewise for Hegel, the cosmos is God because it is the unfolding thoughts of the cosmic mind. But the cosmos does not exhaust God's being. The cosmic mind is more than the cosmos alone. Panentheism. Hegel's philosophy also enthroned the idea of historical development as fundamental to the nature of reality. To put it somewhat bluntly, Hegel historicized God. The cosmic mind did not achieve self-understanding and self-realization in a single moment, in the instant the cosmos came into being. Rather, the cosmic mind's self-realization occurred through a process of development. As the cosmos itself developed, and then as humanity developed, the cosmic mind worked out its own divine essence and perfected its self-comprehension. This development took place through a three-stage process, to which later philosophers gave the famous name thesis, antithesis, synthesis, Now, Hegel hardly ever used that terminology, although he did teach a three-stage process. But since the later terminology of thesis, antithesis, synthesis became universal among philosophers as a description of Hegel's thought, I'm going to employ it here. The idea in Hegel's threefold process of development was that everything began with something simple and untested, the thesis. This, however, always provoked an antithesis, an opposing idea or state of affairs that exposed the inadequacies of the original thesis. Out of the conflict between thesis and antithesis emerged the synthesis, which transcended the one-sidedness of both thesis and antithesis, incorporating into itself all that was good and true in each. The synthesis, however, then itself became a new thesis, provoking a new antithesis and resolving into a new and higher synthesis. This threefold process continued through all reality and all time until at last the perfect synthesis was reached, which could no longer provoke any antithesis. Hegel applied this threefold concept of development to literally all of reality, including human history. He called it the dialectic and made it the key to understanding everything in the cosmos. It was through this dialectic that the cosmic mind progressed towards self-realization in and through the developing cosmos. Now, the human mind and its various civilizations also played a pivotal role in this dialectic, according to Hegel. His philosophy of history expounded the different forms of human civilization: India, Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, Christian Rome, the Middle Ages, the Protestant Reformation, the French Revolution in Catholic France, which had some negative features for Hegel, and the positive, constructive reception of the revolution in Protestant lands, such as Hegel's Prussia. These different forms of civilization did not happen at random, Hegel argued, but necessarily followed a dialectical line of continual progress as the cosmic mind pursued an ever more perfect self-manifestation. Hegel was not only a religious philosopher, he also gave the actual historical religions a positive place in his philosophy. Religion and philosophy, he believed, were both forms of the cosmic mind striving towards truth, the same truth. But they approached it in different ways. Religion approached truth by way of imagery, symbolism, and metaphor, what Hegel called Vorstellung, representation. Philosophy approached the same truth, but cleansed of all symbolism and metaphor, in pure and undiluted intellectual ideas, in Hegel's terminology, Begriff, concept. Hegel regarded the philosophical way of expressing truth through intellectual concept as higher and better than the religious way of expressing it through imagery, although it was the identical truth that both were aspiring to grasp. Now, within that framework, Hegel presented himself as the champion of Christianity. Of all the historical religions, it was Christianity that grasped and expressed the truth in the most perfect way. Christianity was the absolute religion. This was because Christianity alone as a religion fully expressed what Hegel held was the ultimate truth, the unity of God and humanity. To understand Hegel's point here, we must recollect the Hegelian view of the relationship between the cosmos and the cosmic mind. For Hegel, as we've seen, the unfolding history of the cosmos was the cosmic mind's way of achieving self-understanding. That process of self-understanding reached its pinnacle in humanity. In the human mind and its rational capacities, the cosmic mind achieved full self-consciousness. But even this achievement of cosmic self-consciousness in humanity, Hegel thought, underwent a further process toward ever greater perfection, finally arriving at its fullness in Jesus Christ. Now, there are different interpretations of what Hegel meant by this. He may have meant that Jesus was the first human being to grasp fully and perfectly that humans are the self-realization of the cosmic mind. This would make Jesus unique as the man in whom the cosmic mind first achieved perfect self-understanding. Or Hegel may have meant that the church's doctrine of the incarnation, that God and humanity were a single person in Christ the God-man, was the perfect religious expression of this ultimate truth, that God and humanity are one. The doctrine of the incarnation was expounded in the language of imagery and symbolism, religion's proper language according to Hegel. Philosophy purged it of all metaphor and presented the pure intellectual truth. The cosmic mind and humanity are one. Some Hegelian theologians, it should be noted, later sought to interpret Hegel's meaning here in a way more consistent with the truth of the traditional Christian doctrine of the incarnation. Concerning the death of Christ, central to all Christian conceptions of atonement, Hegel held, or seems to have held, that in dying, Christ gave up his particular individual existence so that he might re-emerge in the resurrection as a universal spirit, indwelling his entire global community of the church. This was all part of the cosmic mind's journey through finitude into infinitude in pursuit of its own self-realization. The fact that the cosmic mind had passed through finitude and death, Hegel said, was in itself a saving truth, because it revealed to suffering, dying humanity that its agonies were not alien to the cosmic mind. In God we find, as a later philosopher, Alfred North Whitehead was to put it, the great companion, the fellow sufferer who understands. In Hegel's words in his lectures on the philosophy of religion, quote, "A Lutheran hymn says that God himself is dead. This gives voice to a consciousness that human reality, the finite, the brittle, the feeble, the negative, themselves constitute a moment in the divine. They are within God himself. Therefore, finitude, negativity, and otherness are not alien to God, and do not obstruct our oneness with God as something other. Otherness and negativity are manifested as a moment in the divine nature itself." Now, as we previously observed, Hegel looked upon Protestantism, especially Lutheranism, as the form of Christianity that most truly embodied Christianity's religious essence. Hegel was a practicing Lutheran, and he praised Lutheranism as the purest Christianity against the contrary claims of Roman Catholicism and Calvinism. He had a complex chain of reasoning to establish this. Hegel argued that after the collapse of the Roman Empire in the West in the 5th century, the Middle Ages enveloped Europe in a defective religious culture. Medieval Christianity, in Hegel's view, did not fully grasp or live out the divine human unity established and revealed in the Incarnation. For example, he criticized the medieval Catholic Crusades as a foolish attempt to bridge the gulf of division between God and humanity by conquering the Holy Land, as if that could reconnect the soul with Jesus. The medieval church's greatest sin for Hegel was that it inserted itself as a physical institution between the soul and the Saviour. The darkness of the medieval era began to pass away when the Renaissance blossomed across Europe. But it was the Reformation, argued Hegel, that really represented the full religious flowering of the cosmic mind. Hegel called the Reformation the all-illuminating sun. According to Hegel, the Reformation was a product of the spirit of the Germanic people embodied in Martin Luther, one of world history's most towering figures. Hegel thought that the cosmic mind had uniquely nurtured a sense of moral sincerity and freedom within the Germanic people. Now, he didn't mean this in a crudely nationalistic sense. All peoples, he believed, were capable of this inward heart devotion to sincerity and freedom. But it was in the Germanic people that the cosmic mind had brought about this development in the historical context of late medieval Europe. It was thus Christianity, as absorbed by the Germanic spirit, which rose up in the 16th century, protesting against the corrupted Christianity of the medieval church. The core of the Reformation for Hegel was twofold. First was Protestantism's full perception and acknowledgement of the spiritual essence of human nature, so that spiritual blessings could not be locked up inside the medieval Catholic Church's rituals and dishonestly sold for cash, as indulgences were. Second was the consequent Protestant recognition that every individual human, in accordance with the spiritual essence of human nature, could experience God and salvation for himself or herself by direct personal faith, without being enslaved to an external institution. Faith gave the individual an immediate spiritual connection with Jesus Christ. As Hegel said in the Philosophy of History, Christ is not to be looked upon merely as an individual in history. Rather, the human person enjoys a direct relationship to Christ in the spirit. Subjective spirit has to welcome the spirit of truth into itself so that it might dwell there. In the Lutheran Church, the individual's subjective sentiment and belief are considered just as vital as truth's objective aspect. In Lutheranism, truth isn't a finalized and completed reality. Rather, truth needs to be instilled into the individual person who gives up his own particular existence in favor of the essence of truth, taking that truth to himself as his very own. In this way, subjective spirit enters into freedom in the truth, gives up its own particularity, and comes to itself in fulfilling the truth of its existence. This is the heart of the Reformation. Humanity is in its very nature destined for freedom. That was all Hegel, end of quote. In Protestantism, therefore, especially in its Lutheran form, truth stopped being a merely external thing, as it was in Hegel's view in the medieval Catholic Church, where truth was accepted on the autocratic authority of an institution. Truth as conceived by Protestantism instead resided in the direct, inward, spiritual consciousness of each and every believing heart. Accordingly, personal conscience now became the supreme arbiter of what was true and good. As a result, Protestantism for Hegel set up the banner of free spirit over the destiny of humanity. As Christianity fully realized in Lutheranism was the absolute religion, Hegel likewise regarded his own philosophy as the ultimate philosophy. That is, the cosmic mind's ultimate and perfect self-understanding in philosophical terms. Through Christianity, especially as it came to its maturity in the Lutheran Reformation, the cosmic mind had already journeyed to its goal of self-understanding on the religious plane, where thought operated in the lower realm of metaphor, image, and symbol. Through Hegel's philosophy, the cosmic mind had now journeyed to total self-understanding on the philosophical plane, where thought operated in the higher and purer realm of intellectual concepts purged from the dross of mere image and symbol. For Hegel, then, Christianity, especially Lutheran Christianity, and Hegel's philosophy expressed the same truth. They differed only in the way they expressed it. Hegel's philosophy communicated truth in the form of pure thought, liberated from all picture language. But it was the same truth that had already been grasped by Christianity in the lesser realm of religious imagery and metaphor. Thus it followed that in Hegel's philosophy, the cosmic mind had now at last achieved everything it set out to achieve, absolute self-understanding. Hegel's philosophy was the end and the goal of mind's long journey to self-realization. The German professor described his own philosophy thus: the cosmic mind has made its way this far. Philosophy in its most recent form, Hegel's philosophy, is the end product of all the philosophies that came before it. No established truth has been lost. All the proper values have been kept intact. This idea, Hegel's philosophy, is the outcome of mind's endeavors through nearly 2,500 years, the history of Western philosophy, of mind's most profound striving to make itself objective to itself, to comprehend itself. By the way, it was this kind of grandiose claim that provoked the scorn of other 19th century thinkers like Soren Kierkegaard. Christianity then played a central role within Hegel's philosophy, but he himself virtually admitted that Christianity had to undergo certain modifications to be reinterpreted in keeping with Hegelian philosophy if it was to continue to function as the supreme final religion of humanity. Hegel's gift to 19th century theology seemed very tempting, to assure Christianity of its place in the most modern philosophical outlook, rescued from the irrelevance into which the Enlightenment had consigned it. Some theologians were very eager to take up Hegel's offer, but others were not so sure. And I'll stop at that point. I've got lots more material on what happened to Hegelianism after Hegel's death, but I don't want to tax everyone's patience. So there you are.
Well, thank you. It was a sudden halt, but I'm sure there'll be more to be said, not least from people with questions, either on the screen or in this room. So perhaps just anybody in the room to start with? Nigel?
Yes.
Do you want to look like you have a question? You can speak up loud.
I could have plenty. It's interesting when you mentioned there, Nick, about Spinoza Hegel having been very influenced by Spinoza, and I think Spinoza has had a huge influence, I think, on modern thinkers. And Spinoza was kind of I think Descartes was his was that right? Was his kind of nemesis, so to speak, as the ultimate rationalist, and Spinoza saw emotion as the highest expression of humanity rather than reason, and we see that kind of worked out. I read that somewhere a long time ago, so I couldn't give you my quote, but. What was it, would you say, about Spinoza that Hegel found most appealing?
I think he was, as many people were, attracted by this idea of Spinoza's pantheism, whereby you can resolve everything into unity. God is the universe is God. It's all one, all dualities are dissolved. But Hegel also thought that there was a defect in Spinoza's way of doing it. He thought that Spinoza's pantheism ended up dissolving the reality of the universe. So the only thing that was really left was God. And Hegel didn't want to go down that particular path. He wanted to insist that there was some reality to the cosmos, which is why a lot of people think he was more a panentheist than a pantheist. But I mean, I hasten to add, I'm not a Spinoza expert, and other people may want to step in at that point.
Thank you.
Anybody else from here? Before I go to the, I'm going to say go to the country. I mean, go to those. It's a bit like a question time or something, isn't it? When I've been with people out there, kind of thing. So, who would like to ask a question? And while you're thinking, I'll be watching. I keep my eye on the screen there. While you're thinking, I was looking through kind of old notes from like a lecture I once gave on 19th century something or other, and so eventually you find something if you look hard enough, and then you try to find work out what you actually were on about. But I noticed that it's really Hans Kuhn's book, The Incarnation of God, which is about the sort of the theology of religion of Hegel, and Kuhn, he says there are 3 criticisms of Hegel, right? And then I've only got 2 mentioned, so that's a bit, but maybe 2 will do. One of the things that Hegel doesn't do that Kuhn thinks is bad is that, unlike the 18th century rationalist theologians, he no longer struggles with the meaning of Scripture.
Yes.
He wants to do theology, but without any. Yes. I mean, maybe the 18th century didn't do a very good job of how they use Scripture, but nevertheless, they still could have used it. And secondly, Kuhn thinks that I mean, he's not the only one to say this. It's a reductionist idea of it that rather than seeing Christianity as something to do with the sort of fusion of God and humanity, surely says Christianity is about God's grace and human faith, not about some sort of necessary thing for God to do. So God, according to the Hegelian God, doesn't seem to be very free. These
That's right.
obvious things. That we're already getting on to the evaluation. It's almost that we can't help but do that with someone like Hegel because he does seem, let's put it mildly, somewhat exotic, if not esoteric, if not somewhat Gnostic, heterodox. All these terms could apply. So in some sense, we have to kind of get that out of the way, don't we, a little bit before we can appreciate it, perhaps. The objections are.
His system is certainly one of necessity. Everything just evolves, to use that word, by inexorable necessity. So the beginning point dictates what's going to happen at the end. It just all unfolds, and one link leads logically to the next, to the next, to the next. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, till we get to the final synthesis. And for Hegel, there's a necessary, inevitable unfolding of reality. So, I mean, I don't think there's any room for freedom in his system. And it's an interesting point about scripture. I certainly don't get the sense that Hegel anywhere struggles with exegesis or these kind of categories. He's thinking in philosophical terms and wants to baptize Christianity into this philosophical understanding and then present himself as the champion of a philosophized Christianity. But yeah, you don't get the sense that he's sitting there, reading Romans and desperately trying to work out what Paul means and consulting Augustine and Calvin and so on. You don't get that sense with him, I think. It's a highly philosophized Christianity.
I mean, there is still a place for agency, isn't there? There's still a place for kind of the idea that spirit coming into the world enables people to improve, to be educated, to make world historical decisions. So the idea that the Reformation was about freedom is something that he takes up. I mean, there is that, although we have just said it's a necessitarian kind of sense of everything that he's about, there's still, freedom is an important word for him, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, I haven't got the, this is a much truncated form of a huge sort of tome I wrote on Hegel's philosophy, but he reinterprets what the word freedom means. It's by no means, when he talks about, there's a jibe that Bertrand Russell makes about Hegel's conception of freedom. Then in Hegel, freedom means my right to obey the police. So he does redefine these terms, and they end up meaning something. You think, well, yeah, but that's not what I mean by freedom, And
maybe the collective is bigger than the individual. So, you could say that in his favor. You could talk about communitarianism in Hegel, because Sittlichkeit is a morality of everybody that we all share in it. So,
but ultimately, for him, the agent is still the cosmic mind or spirit,
right,
which particularly operates through these individuals whom he called world souls. We describe Napoleon as he's one of these world souls in whom the spirit is advancing its agenda, sort of smashing things and putting things together again.
So there, and we get from that kind of Thomas Carlyle, Nietzsche, Adolf Hitler. It's succession. Yeah.
Be interesting to look at the Carlyle-Hegel relationship. Whether he was consciously drawing on that, I don't know.
Well, George Eliot obviously was. I think Peter Hodgson's written a book on George Eliot's use of Hegel. I think aspects of it.
Well, she was well versed in German thought, of course. Yeah.
Translated the Phenomenon of Spirit, did she?
Oh, did she? I know she translated Strauss.
That's like music. You're right. So it wasn't. So it was that Lewis, her partner, translated German philosophy as well. Maybe that was more good. But anyway,
but she was tuned into what was going on in Germany.
Yeah, it was an 1840s, 50s sort of London circle.
Big
into Hegel. Yeah. Okay, so I give people time, I think, to get a question framed. bought some time. Now, does anyone want to volunteer before I pick on somebody?
I'll say I don't have a question necessarily, but I'll say I'm really excited about this. My let's see, the philosophy of Christian thought class at RTS in Jackson was the most difficult class that I took. I took with Dr. Bogus, who was brilliant, and I really enjoyed it. But the categories and the people was just such a foreign world to me, and so I was taking like 16 hours that semester. It was just I just got through it, and so I'm excited about it. I've enjoyed your other books. They're accessible, but have depth to them, and so I'm excited about that because I think it'll help me tremendously. So this is an area that I'm incredibly weak in, so I'm excited about being stronger in it. So.
Quite interesting, and it's a mark of a good grad student who wants to learn things that aren't directly related to his thesis, but maybe indirectly related. It's always a good sign. Nick, sorry, do you want to come back on that?
I wish I could be more excited about Hegel myself. But, it's necessity. Really, well, it was necessity that drove me to have to look at him. To be perfectly honest, I found the secondary sources a lot more helpful than the man himself. I kept faltering and failing in trying to understand what he was saying. Yeah. But there are some very, very good secondary sources out there. Particularly, there's a little book by Peter Singer on Hegel's philosophy, which is fantastic. It's such a marvel of compression and lucidity.
This is the animal rights.
Right, it's the
Peter
same
Singer.
guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But this was something he wrote 50-odd years ago. So if anyone wants to read a good secondary source on Hegel, I would say Peter Singer's little book.
Nick, can I ask what? I mean, it's complex, isn't it, Hegel? And yet has sort of remained. Well, there was a period of kind of anti-Hegelianism, wasn't there, within philosophical thought, but he remains popular both on the left and the right politically, as Mark would say. You know,
yes,
plenty in the 1930s yes. On both sides yes. Of the divide, who called upon Hegel as kind of supporting their views.
Yes. One of his greatest disciples was Karl Marx.
Yes, that's right. That's what I was thinking.
Who just removed the spiritual component and made the dialectic purely material, which is why Marxism is sometimes called dialectical materialism. So he's got all the thesis, antithesis, synthesis stuff, and the inexorable development and so on. But it's just that there isn't a cosmic mind behind it anymore.
Right. That was really my question. Why? Why did he retain that popularity on either side? Were they both just picking up on different things that they liked and using them for their own ends in that sense?
Well, Marx clearly was. I'd have this whole section on what happened to Hegelianism after Hegel, but I'd reached the 45-minute mark, which is why I ended so abruptly. But I mean, there were many people who tried to carry on Hegel's project. But to be honest, most of these are theologians, philosophers I haven't heard of. So they were important in their own day, but they probably don't resonate very much today.
Could you give us an example or two, Nick?
Yes. Well, no, there is one I have heard of, because I used to have his systematic theology. There's a fellow called Hans Martensen, who lectured at Copenhagen University and was the Bishop of Zealand from 1854. And he was a Hegelian, and he wrote a systematic theology called Christian Dogmatics, a compendium of the doctrines of Christianity, which is a quasi-Hegelianized attempt to present the whole compass of Christian doctrine. He was one of Kierkegaard's main targets. Kierkegaard had absolute scorn for Martensen. Right. And then in America, there's a fellow called Frederick Augustus Rauch, R-A-U-C-H, Rauch.
American.
Well, he was a German who fled to America. But he ended up at Mercersburg Seminary, and he's regarded as the sort of the grandfather of Mercersburg theology. So John W. Nevin, Philip Schaff, Rauch was their great predecessor and kind of the enabler.
That's interesting, because of course Schaff was a conservative in the sense that Tulloch was his kind of one of his mentors. So at Mercersburg, there's actually quite a coming together of this kind of dialectical thing going on there.
Indeed. So he represented a school of thought that was much more conservative, the right Hegelians, they're called, who wanted to adapt and interpret Hegel in a conservative way.
Oh, actually, okay.
Both politically and theologically. So you've got right Hegelians who are political and right Hegelians who are theological. So he's a right Hegelian theologically, wanting to bend Hegel to the purposes of a more conservative theology. And that's one of the ingredients that goes into the making of Mercersburg theology, which of course made a big splash in 19th century America.
Of course, and not much known today, Mercersburg theology. So it was tending to be a middle way between kind of what we call liberal progressive theologies in North America and conservative reform types like at
Princeton, yeah.
Looking at Rick Schumann, you must have one or two thoughts on this.
I was wondering which question I was going to ask, but I'm always considering Hegel as white. I'm just saying it as I think it's a high level. Emerald person versus Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard was very on the side of morality and reason when you think about his philosophy. And did anything come across your research about Hegel's thoughts on morality or ethics? Because he's always thinking big and never subjective. Yeah. So on a subject. So
yeah, that's all in his treatise Philosophy of Right, which is a grand treatise on ethics with a special focus on ethics in community. So it looks at things like the state and the government and this sort of thing, but it's all framed ethically. And a lot of it's a critique of Immanuel Kant, who he thought had a very unanchored view of morality, something quite abstract. And Hegel wanted to argue that morality is actually not, it's not abstract, it's concrete, it has concrete forms, sort of the family, community, state. But unfortunately, I have written a lot about that elsewhere, but I don't have those notes with me, and I don't want to rely on my memory. But that's the treatise to go to if you want to see Hegel's thoughts on ethics. It's a very, very rich treatise, I think, and quite a good demolition of Kant's abstractness, I would say. Maybe it's one of the treatises of Hegel I most resonated with. I thought he treated ethics very well as something rooted in history and in nature, rather than just sort of an abstract moral law.
What do you think about natural law?
What did he think about it?
Yes. As propounded by Aquinas.
Well, I mean, Hegel wasn't a moral relativist. I mean, he believed in objective morality, but he saw it as something. He didn't like this idea that there's just this abstract, free-floating moral law with very little content, which is kind of just do what is right. He thought it was something that arose within our nature, and our nature is necessarily communitarian. We don't live as isolated individuals accessing an abstract moral law. We learn the moral law in community, at our mother's knee, in family life, in church life, and as being members of a civic community. So he believes in natural law in that sense. It's the way he's framing it. It's different.
and as something that is common to all of humanity.
Yeah.
Almost like hardwired into the conscience.
Hardwired into human nature, you would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't have those notes with me, Nigel, and I don't want to start guessing at what I once thought when I read them some years ago, when I read the treatise some years ago.
Mm.
But the important thing I said is he's by no means a moral relativist. You know, that's quite wrong to think that.
And so, although he's not the emphasis is not on the individual, but on the
Yes.
whole of the community, which obviously does have some dangers because conscience is not individual conscience is that's just your opinion kind of thing. When we put it all together, you're outvoted kind of idea. But also, I suppose that the idea of the mysticism that he gets from Jakob Böhme and people even earlier than that, which like Cyril or Regan have written about how the heterodox Hegel. That if you're sort of feasting, if your theological reading material is already sort of rather speculative and rather mystical, then that's going to affect kind of what comes out in your writing. At least I think. I mean, Regan may be a little bit one-sided on that, perhaps, but there is something in that, isn't there?
I think you know a lot more about this than I do.
No, it's a Catholic kind of rejection of Hegel on the one hand,
Right.
and Protestantism on the other hand. That the two are you're always going to get.
Yes.
But Protestantism itself was veering off in one direction, and Hegel is a kind of extension. Almost like kind of the reduction to the observance of Protestantism.
Well, is that a Catholic critique?
Particularly.
Interesting. Barth calls Hegel the Protestant Aquinas.
Yeah.
Whose day has still not come.
Right.
Interesting, gentlemen.
And so much the worse for Barth, because so even if Barth doesn't say it himself, you kind of have disciples of Barth who will say that God's being is in becoming.
Yes.
That God is not so much about essence, but about his will.
Yes.
That God can self-determine, but in that, he doesn't change, he is in motion.
It's all beyond me.
No, I don't. But that's getting into. We were talking about this earlier before we came on. This sort of thing about when does historical theology become systematic theology?
Yes.
Or are these two very different ways of speaking about the same kind of material?
Yeah, I recognise some of the terms you're using and some of the debates, but I feel out of my depth, to be honest. I'll stick with being a historical commentator in it.
Well, it's amazing. That we I think have been led into these realms, which I think most of us would fear to tread. So we're very more than grateful, and we're kind of looking forward to seeing also the bits about what happened after Hegel and details like that, because the story does continue, as you said. I don't want to let anybody who feels that they've got something to say. It could be a question. It could be a question out of ignorance, or a question out of knowledge, or just a comment or observation. We wouldn't want you to go away without feeling you were able to do that. Ines, you've got something to say.
Yeah, well, Nick, again, thank you. I think it was excellent how you present Hegel to us. It took me back many, many years when I was a student listening to my professor explaining Hegel. Or let me just go to Rick's. I thought Hegel is named Hegel is his name, and I thought is it Hegel? Okay. But yeah, so just perhaps one question, Nick, in the fact that there is this dialectical process is definitely painted as progress, as going forward. And in that process, it is progress in terms of freedom and progress in terms of reason.
Yes.
And I think probably one of the critiques from a more modern point of view is, if we look at reality today and how history developed, can we really think we apart from technological progress, did we make any other progress? We are still struggling with wars, struggling with all kinds of geopolitical issues. So in that sense, is the spirit progressively manifesting itself purely from the observation of our political reality? So yeah, just a thought.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, one of the big problems in my mind with Hegel is that he presents his own philosophy as this is the end point. The cosmic mind has now achieved perfect self-understanding. This is it, you know, this is the finished product. But philosophy didn't stop at that point. It just kept going. So what happened? Did the cosmic mind make a mistake or something? Because, you know, philosophy just kept moving, changing, evolving, and now Hegel is to some extent a historical artifact. So that's a bit strange. And it's also the application of that to politics. He seemed to see the Prussian state in his own day as like this is the cosmic mind achieving the ideal form of political organization. But that's just a historical artifact as well now, because, you know, the Prussian state hasn't existed for quite a long time now. And most people looking back at what it was wouldn't say that's the ideal form of political self-organization. So in that sense, history has left him behind. And if history has left him behind, and if history is what he thought it was, it means the cosmic mind has left him behind. So all his claims were wrong. You know, he thought finality had arrived politically and philosophically, but apparently not, because it's now 200 years later. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That was exactly the point I wanted to just to ask there and to make. And so, yeah, thank you, Nick. I agree 100% with you. I'm not saying there's nothing we can learn from Hegel's. When I started to get involved in philosophy of mind, I thought I will look into Hegel more, into his philosophy of mind. But as you have mentioned, the way he's writing is very, very challenging. So after I started with the German book, I bought an English one, and I didn't even finish that. So
yeah, I can't disagree with that. Read Peter Singer. That's all I can say.
It's enjoyed reading Hegel.
It's in one of these little kind of introductions to the great thinkers series.
Oh, I know the series. Yeah,
I can't remember exactly what it's called. It was done around about 1980-ish. There's a much larger thing done by Charles Taylor on Hegel. He's a Catholic philosopher.
Oh yeah, Charles Taylor.
That's
Social Imaginary.
That's quite rich. And it's much easier to understand than Hegel, but it's also more difficult to understand than Singer. It's somewhere in between the two.
Any more contributions?
Yeah, just a funny occurrence, because when you mentioned that Hegel moved to the Thuringian town of Jena, I had to think what you meant, because you said Jena. I didn't. I thought what?
I don't know how to pronounce half these German names. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You can always rely on me. I will help you. Yeah, it's funny for me because everything, almost in every lecture we have, there's something German, and I think, who is he talking about? Okay, yeah.
Forgive us, Rix. Forgive us.
It's always hard.
I couldn't say antithesis, thesis, and synthesis in one sentence so coherently as you, Nick, because you did it in, I think I counted 5 or 6 sentences where you said these 3 words numerous times in one row. It's like a tongue breaker, as we say.
So yeah.
Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. I practiced it, you see. Although apparently Hegel hardly ever used those terms himself.
And yet it's so associated with it.
Yeah, exactly. I forget now. He did have a name, this triad. He used 3 different terms, but it's gone out of my head. It certainly wasn't thesis, antithesis, synthesis. But since everyone uses that, you know, I bow to the popular will, you know.
Yeah. At least it's conceptually associated with it, even if it's not the precise language.
Can I just say thank you to Nick for writing books and for that being so clear as a very young learner about all of this, not in age, but you know, in mind. I'm trying to join in with things and expand how I'm thinking. And I find your books and what you've just delivered very clear and I'm able to understand very well. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you. If I've enabled someone to understand Hegel, that is a work of grace. Thank you.
And Rex, was that sublation? Was that auf Hebung? Yes, that's a Hegelian idea that everything is raised up from what it is without actually changing itself. Yeah. Okay.
Very good.
Great. Well, great to see you all. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining in. We next week, I think.
2 weeks. 2 weeks, isn't it? Next week.
I think it's next week I'm on, isn't it? Unfortunately.
You plan.
Yeah, I plan. Well, it's just when sometimes people come back to you and say, "Oh no, I'd rather do that date," and so therefore you say, okay, I've got something else was going to go in there. So it's just been a little bit it's a little bit concentrated. So we've got something today, we've got something next Wednesday, we've got something the following Wednesday. Then after that, as it gets more spaced out, but as it were. More ways than one. And so we're delighted to see you any occasion in the next few weeks on the Wednesday at this time. So thanks and bye for now.
See you, folks.
See you all.